Back in episode 37, I shared the stories of three North Carolina women convicted of poisoning people in their families: Velma Barfield, Blanche Taylor Moore, and Nanny Doss. Arsenic is a chemical element that occurs naturally in the earth. In its raw state, it's not harmful, but it becomes poisonous when converted to arsenic trioxide, commonly known as white arsenic. It's also odorless and colorless, and difficult to detect without specific testing. Velma Barfield and Nanny Doss mixed rat poison into food and beverages of their victims, and Blanche Taylor Moore was a fan of ant poison. Both types of poison contain arsenic. But when you take a closer look at murders committed in North Carolina, you'll find even more that include poison. Today we'll discuss the deaths of Sandy Coulthard, whose husband diabolically poisoned her for months in High Point; Eric Miller, an AIDS researcher who was murdered by his wife in Raleigh; and Stacy Hunsucker, who was poisoned by the active ingredient in Visine eyedrops when her husband spiked her drinks with them. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 138, Murdered by Poison: The Deaths of Sandy Coulthard, Eric Miller, and Stacy Hunsucker. On July 9, 1988, 30-year-old High Point, North Carolina resident Sandy Coulthard passed away at Duke University Medical Center. She'd been sick for about 6 months with vomiting, diarrhea, and numbness of her feet and fingers. Doctors had diagnosed her with Guillain-Barré syndrome and had been treating her for it, but her symptoms never improved. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a rare neurological disorder that causes a person's immune system to attack their nervous system. It often begins suddenly, and as symptoms increase, can cause weakness and paralysis. While there is no cure for Guillain-Barré syndrome, treatments such as plasma exchange and intravenous immunoglobulin therapy can be administered for relief of symptoms. Sandy, a married mother with 2 children, first went to High Point Regional Hospital in early June of 1988 before being transferred to Duke University Medical Center. Sandy was a member of the High Point Junior League and Emerywood Baptist Church. She and her husband, Robert Franklin Coulthard Jr., had both met at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem and had been married since 1982. When the results of Sandy's autopsy came back from the state medical examiner's office, they showed she had died from arsenic poisoning. Dr. John Butts, the chief state medical examiner, said, "It was our feeling that she had had more than 1 dose of arsenic." Investigators arranged to have Sandy's body exhumed after the autopsy results were released so they could remove hair samples. On September 19, 1988, police arrested her husband, 31-year-old Robert Coulthard, and charged him with first-degree murder. Robert was then a vice president at Crestwood Furniture Company. The Guilford district attorney said that Sandy had received at least 1 dose of arsenic after she had been admitted to Duke in June of 1988. After the news of Robert's arrest was released, neighbors of the couple said they couldn't believe he'd been involved in his wife's death. They thought Robert and Sandy were both nice and seemed happy. Within 2 months of his arrest, the community learned that Robert was indeed guilty of the crime he'd been charged with. He admitted it himself when he pleaded guilty in late November of 1988. Guilford District Attorney Jim Kimmel said Sandy Coulthard's autopsy showed she had 142 times the normal concentration of arsenic found in humans in her body when she died. Tests conducted on her hair samples showed she had received at least 5 separate doses, beginning in December 1987. She had likely been given the first dose in a fast food hamburger purchased by Robert. This also meant she had been poisoned with arsenic while she was carrying the couple's second child, a son who was only a year old when she passed away. Their daughter was 3 at the time. District Attorney Kimmel said records showed Robert Coulthard ordered arsenic from a New Jersey chemical company on September 26, 1986. This was 5 days after he returned home from a trip with a woman he was having an affair with. The arsenic was shipped to Robert's workplace at the time, Hickory Furniture Company in High Point. He used a personal check to pay for the poison. but a coworker noticed the box displaying a skull and crossbones and jokingly asked if he planned to kill his wife, to which he replied, "No, we have a rat problem." After Sandy became ill in April of 1988, Robert applied for an increase in life insurance benefits for his wife. The request was denied because Sandy was being treated for what doctors thought was Guillain-Barré syndrome. When she passed away, the couple had $351,000 in life insurance policies, naming Robert and the two children as the beneficiaries. Assistant District Attorney Richard Lyle said he believed Robert's motive for murder was that he wanted out of his marriage to Sandy so he could proceed with his other romantic relationship. The judge in the case ruled that the prosecutors had insufficient evidence of aggravating factors for a jury to consider the death penalty for Robert Coulthard. Those aggravating factors involve a person murdering for financial gain and carrying out a murder that was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Doctors at Duke University Medical Center said Sandy Coulthard didn't suffer before her death because she was on medication most of the time she was ill. I'm sure Sandy would probably disagree that she wasn't suffering from the poisoning. Instead, Robert Coulthard received a sentence of life in prison, where he still sits today. A professor and researcher from Davidson College named Cynthia Lewis discussed the murder of Sandy Coulthard in a journal article she wrote for the Journal of Criminal Justice and Popular Culture titled "Monstrous Arrogance: Husbands Who Choose Murder Over Divorce." She interviewed Mark McNeil, who was a detective on the case when Sandy was murdered. He shared that immediately after Sandy's death, Robert went to a payphone in the hospital to call his mistress. He called Robert an organized psychopath. Investigators believed Robert had his children listed as the beneficiaries of the couple's life insurance policies, so he couldn't be accused of profiting off her murder. They thought he wasn't just seeking an escape from his wife, but possibly from his whole family. He had become addicted to gambling and enjoyed living a high-roller lifestyle with other women. Investigators theorized he either was going to use the life insurance money as a trust fund for his children, where someone else like Sandy's parents could raise them, or he could use that money to fund the unencumbered lifestyle he was seeking. His children did indeed go to live with their maternal grandparents after he was sentenced for the murder. After Sandy's death, her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against High Point Regional Hospital and Duke University Medical Center, claiming physicians failed to act upon blood test results that showed Sandy had high levels of arsenic in her system before she died. They eventually reached an undisclosed settlement with High Point Regional Hospital and two doctors named in the suit, and filed for a voluntary dismissal of the case against Duke University and Private Diagnostic Clinic of Durham and High Point Internal Medicine Associates. The next murder I want to talk about took place on December 2nd, 2000. That's when a 30-year-old Raleigh man named Eric Miller passed away unexpectedly after being admitted to Rex Hospital. Eric Miller was working as a postdoctoral fellow at UNC Chapel Hill's Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. According to an article that ran in the News and Observer immediately following his death, Eric first became ill with flu-like symptoms after work on November 15th of that year. He was admitted to the hospital that night and was then transferred over to the UNC healthcare system in Chapel Hill. Blood work that was taken during that stay indicated he had arsenic in his system, but those results weren't available to him until a week later. On November 24th, he was released from the hospital after his condition improved. But on November 30th, he became ill again, and after being admitted to the hospital, lab tests again revealed arsenic in his blood. Investigators were immediately suspicious. Following his death, they searched the home Eric shared with his wife, Anne, and their infant daughter. Then, on December 4th, they searched for arsenic or any of its derivatives at GlaxoSmithKline in Research Triangle Park, where Anne worked as a research scientist. Among the items they confiscated were sodium cacodylate, 2 expense reports, a fulfillment contract, a lab notebook, and a Hewlett-Packard computer and keyboard. Police took 200 milliliters of the sodium cacodylate, which is a toxic arsenic compound, but one that isn't as dangerous as the most potent form of arsenic. The News and Observer interviewed an expert on poisons at the time for this article, Dr. Marcia Ford, who worked in Charlotte as the director of the Carolina Poison Center. She said sodium cacodylate is a white crystalline chemical often used as an herbicide and insecticide. Some forms of it are often found in research labs, especially in ones seeking cancer treatments. At the time, GlaxoSmithKline had done research on leukemia chemotherapy. A lethal dose of sodium cacodylate would be equivalent to what you'd find in a shot glass. Symptoms of exposure include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, low blood pressure, and rapid heart rate. Eric Miller was experiencing many of these symptoms in the weeks before his death. In mid-January of 2001, the local news outlets began painting a picture of the events that led up to Eric Miller's suspicious death. They reported that police obtained a search warrant to search the home of a man named Darrell Willard, age 37, as part of the investigation. Darrell was a colleague of Ann Miller's from GlaxoSmithKline and was apparently with Eric the night he first began experiencing signs of illness on November 15th. On that night, Eric went bowling with Darrell Willard and two other colleagues of Ann's. Darrell bought the group a pitcher of beer, and Eric commented about it tasting bad. He continued bowling even after beginning to feel sick about an hour later. When he got home, Ann noticed he was in distress and drove him to Rex Hospital when he was first admitted. Police were searching Darrell Willard's home because they had discovered he and Ann Miller had been having an affair. Both were married at the time, and both would have had access to the arsenic compounds through their jobs at GlaxoSmithKline. Investigators searched 2 vehicles at the Willard home, 2 compact Presario computers, and other documents and bills. The search warrants indicated they were looking for evidence of trips, arsenic and other poisons, and any items related to the Millers. The day after police executed the search warrants, Darrell Willard took his own life. His wife discovered his body in their garage when she returned home from work. He left a note behind that said he had no involvement in Eric's death. He had consulted an attorney, though, named Rick Gammon, and Gammon said he believed the Raleigh police considered Darrell a suspect. The story quickly gained a lot of traction because, as one Associated Press headline read, it featured a poisoning mystery that unfolded among educated suburbanites in North Carolina. Writer Estes Thompson wrote, "While arsenic has been the weapon of choice in at least 2 other infamous North Carolina killings, those didn't feature the well-educated professional young suburbanites who make up the cast of the Miller story." Hubert Stone, who served as the sheriff when Velma Barfield was arrested for poisoning 4 different people with arsenic, said people who used arsenic in cases he investigated typically appeared to be very loving. It was usually someone who was very close to the victim, and not someone anyone would suspect. By all accounts, Eric and Ann Miller seemed to be a happy couple. That's why the news of his death and the involvement of arsenic was so shocking. Ann Miller was born Ann Breyer, and she attended high school in Spring Grove, Pennsylvania. She participated in band, choir, track, cheerleading, and played varsity field hockey. She was nominated for prom queen her senior year. Eric Miller was also active and successful in high school, which was in Indiana, and he played tennis and served as an altar boy at the Catholic church his family attended for 8 years. He met Ann in a biology class when both were attending Purdue University. In 1992, they both graduated from the university with honors and degrees in biology and moved to Raleigh to pursue doctoral degrees at NC State University. While Eric immersed himself in research at the university, Ann had a harder time finding a good fit. She eventually left her doctorate studies and took a job with GlaxoSmithKline after obtaining a master's degree in biochemistry. Colleagues and friends told the News and Observer that Ann was always immaculately dressed, liked having her hair and nails done, and enjoyed home and crafting projects. The couple married in 1993. They joined a local Catholic church, helped organize retreats for engaged couples, and spoke at weekend marriage retreats. Ann was making good money at her research job, and in 1999, after Eric received his doctorate, he began working as an AIDS researcher at UNC Chapel Hill's Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. He made significantly less money as Ann in this position. Ann gave birth to their daughter in January of 2000. The couple coordinated their schedules to drop off and pick up their daughter at her daycare. Meanwhile, although just as motivated and ambitious as Eric and Ann Miller, Darrell Willard came from a much different background. He grew up in Arkansas, where his father had a job as a supervisor for the state power company. His classmates remembered him as always sitting on the front row in class, terrified to make a beat, and he ended up finishing first in his class of 180 students. His classmates also voted him most likely to succeed. While he was friendly and courteous, he'd also grown up with a strict Baptist upbringing and didn't party on the weekends like others in town. He graduated from the University of Arkansas, where he met his future wife, a woman named Yvette. They first moved to Philadelphia so he could take a job with a pharmaceutical company, then to research Triangle Park when he accepted a position with GlaxoSmithKline. He and his wife had a young daughter and bought a house in North Raleigh. Somewhere along the way, while working with Ann Miller on an arthritis research project, the two developed a relationship. As police were searching through Ann's work computer after Eric's death, they found email messages and phone calls between her and Daryl. They both retained attorneys quickly, and then Daryl shot himself in the family garage the day after he was served with the search warrants. He left behind his 3-year-old daughter. His family didn't believe he had anything to do with Eric's death from arsenic poisoning, but felt like the media coverage of the case had driven him to suicide. He was ashamed to have the news of his affair revealed for all the world to see. Those observing from the outside wondered if Ann and Daryl had poisoned Eric with arsenic, and why would they do it with a substance that could so easily be traced back to them? It didn't make sense. Ann's friends from college didn't believe she could have done something so terrible. Money didn't seem to be a motive. Eric Miller had a life insurance policy totaling $100,000, but Ann had relinquished control of his estate over to his parents. He didn't have a will at the time of his death. In May of 2001, the North Carolina Medical Examiner released Eric's autopsy report. It confirmed he'd been killed by arsenic and had received 2 doses of the deadly poison, one while he was still in the hospital. The substance taken from Ann's laboratory was the same as that found in Eric's blood, liver, and urine. It appeared he had also received a dose of arsenic the summer before his death. Phone records showed that Ann and Daryl had called each other over 100 times in the fall of 2000. One 24-minute call took place less than 2 hours before Eric died. Ann stopped going to work and became fearful of leaving her house due to the intense media coverage. Investigators worked to gather as much evidence as they could so they could have an airtight case against Eric's widow. But it would take almost 4 years for them to make an arrest. On September 27, 2004, a jury indicted her on first-degree murder charges in Wake County. She was denied bail. One of the main things preventing investigators from making an arrest was a discussion Daryl Willard had with his attorney before his death. When police asked this attorney, Richard Gammon, what Daryl had told him during their meeting, he cited attorney-client privilege. Ann Miller had moved out of the Raleigh area to Wilmington, North Carolina, and got remarried to a Christian rock guitarist. Finally, in the spring of 2004, the North Carolina Supreme Court said Gammon would have to tell a grand jury what he knew about Eric's death. He complied. Ann, who now went by Ann Contz, was arrested a few months later. The Wake County District Attorney chose not to seek the death penalty in Ann Miller Contz's murder trial. On December 10, 2004, a Wake County Superior Court judge set her bail at $3 million after District Attorney Colin Willoughby shared the contents of a private conversation between Daryl Willard and his attorney Richard Gammon shortly before his death. He told his lawyer that Ann had admitted to administering poison to Eric Miller before he died. She said that while visiting her husband in the hospital, she took a syringe from her purse and injected into his IV line. During Ann Miller Contz's bail hearing, her attorney argued that she wasn't a flight risk, had no criminal convictions, and could live with her second husband and parents in Wilmington if the court required it. He presented letters of support from her family and friends testifying about her character. Her father and second husband both said Ann was emotionally and mentally stable and unlikely to flee the area or try and intimidate witnesses. But it was the transcript of the conversation Daryl Willard had with his attorney before his death that made the biggest impact at the bail hearing. Here is what the transcript said verbatim. Mr. Willard then stated that on one recent occasion he had met Mrs. Miller in a parking lot and they had a conversation while in an SUV. He stated that during this conversation, Mrs. Miller was crying and that she told him she had been to the hospital where Mr. Miller had been admitted. She stated to Mr. Willard that she was by herself in the room with Mr. Miller for a period of time. She then told Mr. Willard that she took a syringe and a needle from her purse and injected the contents of the syringe into Mr. Miller's IV. Upon being questioned as to the contents of the syringe, Mr. Willard either stated the substance was from work or that Mrs. Miller told him it was from work. He then stated that he asked Mrs. Miller why she had done this, and she replied, "I don't know." Mr. Willard surmised that Mrs. Miller was attempting to end Mr. Miller's suffering from his illness with these actions. Although Mr. Gammon and Mr. Trey Fitzhugh do not recall specifically whether Mr. Willard or Mrs. Miller used the word arsenic with reference to the contents of the syringe, it was clear that the substance contained in the syringe was poisonous. Mr. Willard then stated that he knew nothing further of the circumstances surrounding Eric Miller's death. He also stated that he had not told anyone, including his wife, about Mrs. Miller's statements to him. A transcript of the note Darrell Willard left behind for his family after his death was also read to the court. It said, "I am sorry to leave you, my wife, my beautiful daughter, my family and friends like this. The past year has been full of anxiety, sickness, and pain. Today I have been accused of an action for which I am not responsible. I have taken no one's life, save my own. The world looks black to me. All I can see is the smearing of my name, pain caused to my family, personal humiliation, and probable economic ruin. I deeply regret my manner of leaving the world, but hope any pain caused will not linger, at least not in the fashion that my remaining here might engender. I have been blessed with a life full of love and caring. I love you, my family. I love you, my daughter. I love you all." Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. I had been unhappy with my old podcast host for a while and was looking for other options. I discovered Riverside FM and learned that for one low monthly fee, it would help me record the podcast and utilize video capabilities. It uses AI technology to easily create clips from each episode that I can share on my social media accounts. I don't consider myself very tech savvy, but audio and video editing with Riverside FM software has been a breeze, and I look forward to recording days now. If you are looking for a company that will help you with all your podcasting, webinar, and video needs, I encourage you to check out Riverside FM. You won't be disappointed. I'll include a link for you in the show notes. There are a lot of trends floating around on social media on the best way to keep your skin looking hydrated and youthful, but I don't like to follow fads, especially when I find a product that works. Enter the products from SkinX Erin. I use her pre-cleanse oil, hydrating beauty oil, and perfecting night oil, and I was hooked from the first drop. The pre-cleanse gently removes dirt, impurities, and even waterproof makeup without tugging, all without stripping or drying out your skin. In addition to keeping your skin clear, it also helps your skin feel firmer and reduces the signs of aging. The hydrating beauty oil is a powerful and effective skin hydrator that never leaves your skin feeling greasy. The signature squalane oil is known for its anti-inflammatory and anti-aging properties. It's perfect for treating skin conditions like acne and eczema and reducing the appearance of wrinkles. The Perfecting Night Oil is loaded with vitamins E and A and is rich with antioxidants and omegas that nourish skin, replenish elasticity, and reduces stretch marks. A few drops a day leave skin smoother, more vibrant, and youthful. My skin instantly drinks in these oils, and I've never had a problem with them leaving a residue on my clothes or sheets at night, only giving me a healthy glow that my husband often compliments me on. Want to try out the products for yourself? Go to shopxerin.com and use the code MissingCarolinas10 for a 10% discount on your order. Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or more inclined to creative writing, or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out a digital course I created called You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, promotion and monetization ideas, and ways you can repurpose your podcast content. All written materials and resources are provided by me. I'll also give you a handout with information discussed in the webinar, along with suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore. Best of all, this webinar only costs $30. You can find it by going to wow-womenonwriting.com and clicking on the Classroom tab. I'll also post a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. In early November 2005, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in the poisoning death of Eric Miller. Her attorney, Joseph B. Cheshire V, read a statement from her in front of the court. For reasons I do not now understand, I permitted myself to knowingly participate with Darrell Willard in events which cost my husband his life. I will struggle for the rest of my life with how this could have happened. I have asked God to forgive me, and I hope that God will also help those others whom I have hurt to find it in their hearts one day to forgive me as well. Eric's family shared victim impact statements, and they were angry and combative. They didn't appreciate that she didn't share her statement and instead asked her attorney to read it. Eric's sister said, "Why, Anne? Why did you cruelly murder my brother Eric? The only explanation I can find is the fact that there is pure evil in this world. The only thing Anne Breyer Miller Const is sorry about is that she was caught." After the plea, District Attorney Colin Willoughby called Chris Morgan, a retired police lieutenant who investigated Eric Miller's death, to the stand so he could lay out the prosecution's case. Lieutenant Morgan said Anne and Darrell Willard were having an affair and both had access to arsenic at work. During a bowling outing in Raleigh, Eric became ill after drinking a beer Darrell had poured for him. He went into the hospital later that night, where he slowly began showing signs of improvement and went home. 2 weeks later, Eric was hospitalized again after his symptoms returned. This is when Darrell told his attorney that Anne admitted to injecting poison into her then-husband's IV. Anne Miller was sentenced to between 25 and 31 and a half years in prison, the maximum allowed for a person with no prior convictions. Anne Miller Const is now 55 years old, remains incarcerated in North Carolina, and her earliest projected release date is 2029. And finally today, I want to talk about the suspicious death of a Charlotte woman that occurred back in 2018. Most people wouldn't think of Visine, a common over-the-counter eye drop product used to treat itchy and dry eyes, as a murder weapon, but one Gaston County man, the victim's husband, is accused of using it for just that, and he tried it more than once. On September 23, 2018, Stacy Robinson Hunsucker, a 32-year-old Charlotte preschool teacher and mother of 2 young daughters, passed away suddenly at the home she shared with her husband. Stacy had suffered from heart problems in the past and actually had a pacemaker implanted not long after the birth of the couple's second daughter. Her husband, 35-year-old Jonathan Lee Hunsucker, refused to authorize an autopsy after her death, attributing his wife's sudden passing to myocardial infarction while filing to collect for 2 of his wife's life insurance policies totaling $250,000. Not long after her daughter's death, Stacy's mom, Susie Robinson, grew increasingly suspicious of Jonathan. She suspected he had been cheating on Stacy prior to her death and couldn't understand why he didn't want an autopsy performed. He seemed to have no concerns regarding Stacy's untimely death. Robinson was also taken aback at how quickly he began spending money once he received the proceeds from the life insurance. In less than 6 months, he was publicly sharing his new girlfriend with the world. Susie Robinson's claims attracted the attention of local investigators with the North Carolina Department of Insurance, who opened an insurance fraud investigation. They questioned Jonathan's coworker at Atrium Health's Med Center Air, where he had worked as a paramedic for several years. Jonathan had told 2 coworkers before Stacy's death that if he ever were to murder someone, he would do it using Visine. His coworkers were all surprised that Jonathan had seemed unaffected when Stacy passed away suddenly. When the investigators learned a private company involved with organ donation had kept a few vials of Stacy's blood, they sprung into action. When Stacy's blood was tested by a medical examiner, it came back positive for very high levels of one of the active ingredients in Visine. In fact, the levels were between 30 to 40 times the therapeutic level of tetrahydrozoline. The medical examiner noted that the medicine can have a dramatic effect on the heart and can cause stoppage and heart failure in a short amount of time. In the meantime, Jonathan allegedly set fire to a medical helicopter while he was working as a paramedic on November 16, 2019, causing the pilot to have to make an emergency landing on Independence Boulevard in Charlotte. When investigators brought Jonathan in for questioning and shared the results of the blood tests, he gave them probable cause that he had poisoned his wife with the eye drops and caused her death. He was arrested, and a grand jury indicted him on charges related to first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obtaining property by false pretenses greater than $100,000. He was released after posting $1.5 million in bond and ordered to refrain from spending any more money related to the life insurance payout or assets he had bought with the money. But Jonathan wouldn't stay out of trouble for long. He proceeded to wage a harassment campaign against his former in-laws, Susie and John Robinson. On February 4th, 2023, Jonathan claimed he had stopped to change a flat tire when he was attacked and pistol whipped in the head and injected with an unknown poison. He claimed his assailant was John Robinson. Police investigated his claim but found no evidence John Robinson had assaulted Jonathan. Instead, they discovered Jonathan had been stalking the couple, sending them unwanted packages and following them. That July, Jonathan was also accused of neglecting the 2 children he had with Stacy, and it appeared he had tried to cause harm to his 11-year-old daughter by poisoning her with the same substance he allegedly used to murder Stacy. His daughter was taken to the hospital with low blood pressure, exhaustion, and a low heart rate. Traces of tetrahydrozoline were found in her system after a urine test. Jonathan attempted to once again implicate his former in-laws in the poisoning of his daughter, but the courts weren't buying it. In addition to murder charges, he remains incarcerated facing 4 felony charges of witness intimidation and 4 counts of misdemeanor obstruction of justice. When I read about Jonathan Hunsucker, I couldn't understand why he would be allowed to bond out of jail and then given access to his children if he was suspected of poisoning his wife. With Ann Miller's case, police waited years to arrest her because of the issue they had with Darrell Willard's statement being protected by attorney-client privilege. The media also spoke at great length about how attractive and educated she was, which made me wonder if these appearance and educational attributes have anything to do with how a suspect is treated in the court system. The articles about Robert Coulthard from High Point also talked a lot about his good looks and education from Wake Forest University. But when you look at Velma Barfield, for example, who confessed to murdering 5 people in North Carolina with poison, she was executed in 1984 and given no leniency whatsoever during the sentencing phases of her trials. Velma was also uneducated and had an admitted addiction to prescription drugs. She appears to be the only person convicted of murder by poison that received the death penalty and not life in prison in our state. I have to wonder why. Here are a few other notorious poisoning murders that have taken place in North Carolina. In Smithfield, Sally Holloman poisoned her second husband, Jasper Talton Weaver, in 1970. She admitted to lacing her husband's tea in hospital IVs with ant poison. She was convicted of his death in 1981 and also the shooting death of Pine-Level businessman Ashley Deaver. Rebecca Case Detter was convicted of killing her husband, Donald Gene Detter, with rat poison in 1978 in Kernersville. She testified he was abusive, but was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Pamela Sanders Lanier poisoned her husband, Ivy Dorian Lanier, with arsenic in 1997 in Duplin County. She was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to life. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Thank you so much for those who have already supported me through this platform. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and true crimes profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.